Lama Tantrapa, good morning to you. Good afternoon from the mountains of southwestern Poland.
Well, great to see you, Richard, and I'm so delighted to connect with you finally after quite a while of exchanging messages by email, by Facebook, and whatnot.
Well, I've been enjoying listening to the interviews that you do on Blog Talk Radio, and I thought I would really like to interview you and to ask you a little bit about your experience over the years of working with Qi, one way or another. I mean, it's just one good subject.
You're turning the tables on me.
That's right. As a filmmaker, I like to be asking the questions. I'm more comfortable this side of the camera.
Okay, sure. I would be delighted to answer any questions that you have about my work, Qigong in general, how perhaps my encounters with the different Qigong masters have shaped my understanding of the arts and whatnot.
Okay, well, maybe we could start with this question about the term master, because in my experience, I mean, I started Tai Chi and Qigong in about 1980. And over the years, I've studied with many people, many masters, if you like, many teachers. But the teacher who made the greatest impression on me, and who was the highest representative of his art, never ever called himself a master. And I was very happy with that, because I felt that it meant that he was continuing, he was still open to learning, and he was a humble man. But he was by far the most skillful of his art that I ever met. And so sometimes and also I have to say, I have and my wife have met people who in our lives who have been recognized as masters and enlightened masters, and who have demonstrated that they can be really daft, that they can act in very egocentric ways, which can be very disappointing for their followers and so on. So the whole area of mastery and enlightenment is something I'd like to ask about. What is your angle on that?
Absolutely. Well, let's start with a key issue that seems to be coming up over and over again, and that is, who is supposed to be called a master? Or in other words, who has the audacity to call himself a master? Or perhaps who is bestowed upon the title of a master, or who the students refer to as a master. So all of these three angles can be understood, because they have to be looked at, because otherwise we will be missing something. For example, when it comes to enlightenment, usually people don't wait for somebody to bestow the title of an enlightened being on them. Nobody told Buddha that he was enlightened. Nobody told any other Qigong masters or yoga masters or other enlightened individuals that, okay, now you have the diploma of an enlightened person. That would be really funny, and I would say rather ludicrous. On the other hand, if people announce that they are masters, or pronounce that they are enlightened people, that also may be bogus or sometimes just fake. And so that may be an indication of an ego trip, and that the person is trying to play either for the purpose of self-aggrandizing or for marketing purposes, or both. And if a person is regarded as a master by the students, which I think is the most respectable of these options, this obviously means that the students have spent some time learning from this particular individual. They respect him or her as the top-notch expert, and also express certain degree of respect and appreciation that of the master's teachings, or the time that he or she puts into teaching the students. So I would say all three of these have their pros and cons, just like everything in life. And so we learn how to recognize that neither one of them is the truth in and of itself. It's just like the term of a master also doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. For example, if you have a master's degree, it doesn't mean that your education has reached the glass ceiling. There is nowhere else to go. In fact, you can go to the graduate school and get a doctorate degree, perhaps even go into postdoctorate level of training. So in other words, there is no stopping of education or personal development at the point when you reach a certain level of mastery. And then we also start talking about levels of mastery and recognize that mastery has many levels, just like enlightenment. And it depends on how masterful you are. So then it's not just reaching one final destination of becoming a master. It's developing higher and higher levels of mastery, which is a lifelong journey, and there is no final destination or point where you should stop. So this basically is my approach. It's not the journey to mastery, it's the journey of mastery, or even mastering as a process.
Very good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of development, I suppose one often imagines that maybe when we're struggling with the development of whatever it is we're working on, that we should be experiencing a steady climb toward the mastery that we tend to hope for. But very often this isn't the case, is it? I mean, would you like to say something about how your own, the evolution of your own work has gone? And has it been a steady climb, or has it been a series of revolutions with flat plateaus of nothing going on in between? Or how could you characterize your own development?
Absolutely. This is definitely a dialectic process where there is a combination of certain growth spurts combined with plateaus, sometimes even backsliding. Sometimes you think that you're doing something right, practicing something diligently and getting some results, just to realize after all that you were going into the dead end, or it actually diverted your attention from your most important aspects of your studies or your work. And so, of course, I have experienced both the plateaus and backsliding and getting into some dead ends, and all of that is part of the journey. So the most important thing that I think distinguishes the person who is referred to as a master or deserves to be called a master, as opposed to the novice or perhaps the beginner or the layman, is the tenacity, is the perseverance, because it takes a tremendous amount of perseverance and self-discipline to continue doing something, practicing something for many years. I suppose I would be correct if I quote Malcolm Gladwell, who said something to the effect that it takes approximately 10,000 hours of practicing something or doing something to attain level of mastery or to attain level of excellence in whatever that is. Whether it's practicing music, doing Tai Chi, meditating, or whatever you do. If you are a runner, you won't be running at Olympic level if you ran 20 hours or 100 hours or even 500 hours. If you are a Tai Chi practitioner, for example, and if you're practicing diligently every day of the week, and so you practice for an hour, 360 hours a year. That's still going to take you a number of years to get to 10,000 hours. So, because I started relatively young, I basically developed a lifestyle that rotates or revolves around the practice of energy arts and meditation and the type of personal development that I've been pursuing ever since then. So, regardless of my life circumstances, regardless of the availability of space and environment that would be most conducive for practicing, I still continue practicing even incrementally, or what I even call, it's better not to practice for just an hour or 2 solid hours of training. I think it's more beneficial, especially when it comes to meditation and Qigong practice, to break down the practices into small, incremental bits and pieces. Literally for a few minutes here, a little minutes there, a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the afternoon. You literally practice for just 5 to 10 minutes every other hour, or maybe even every hour. And by the end of the day, you will have actually practiced for longer than you would have practiced had you just dedicated a big chunk of time to it. And what's beautiful about it is that you actually have certain residue of this energy awareness or this meditative state of consciousness after you spend just a few minutes practicing. So it starts infusing the rest of your daily life with this meditative awareness or this energy awareness. In other words, it actually transforms the rest of the day in a way that you are living in a more harmonious state of consciousness and exhibiting it somatically or through a physical body in what I call harmonious culture or movement. And you are the way you move. So if you move in a harmonious way, it actually supports that state of consciousness, that harmonious state of consciousness that we're talking about. There is no way to stay in a harmonious state of consciousness if you're moving in a disharmonious or disoriented fashion. So that's why the movement practices are so important, and that's why I believe that it's not a matter of learning a Qigong style, it's the learning Qigong lifestyle that matters. That's basically why I also created Qigong coaching methodology, or probably pioneered the whole Qigong coaching profession. It's because it's not about just learning some forms or techniques, it's about developing the lifestyle and the quality of everyday attention that is given to the essence of things rather than their superfluous shape and form. That allows us to actually perceive energy, feel its flow, and then learn how to be in the flow. Does that make sense?
Yes, well, I very much agree with that approach. And since I've moved away from the city and now live out in the mountains, I have found that I've actually had to follow very much the pattern of training that you described there, partly because there's so many things to do here. There's wood to be gathered, there's dogs to be exercised, there's things to be done. And sometimes my practice would take the form of things that I could do in the time it took for my husky to run and get a stick and bring it back to me. And I found that there was a useful practice that could be done in that rather short time. So I think that you're right there. And this is a case of integrating into one's life teachings. I remember listening to a Dzogchen teacher years ago that I was filming, and he was saying to his students, integrate, you can do good yoga without anyone even noticing.
Absolutely. Even when you're playing with a husky, for example,
Absolutely.
How you stand, how grounded you are, will determine how far you manage to throw that stick. If you play with your ability to throw the stick farther, you may also pay attention to the culture of movement. For example, how you move your body, whether or not you initiate the movement with the motion of your center of mass or some peripheral parts of the body, whether or not you're using any footwork in that throw, or you're just standing in the same place, whether or not you are throwing the stick with the motion of the hand that moves towards the center line, or it moves away from the center line. And all of these little details, I mean, even such small detail, for example, as throwing with the direction of the Lama Gong point in the direction where you're trying to project the stick. And that is not just this throwing the stick, it's energy projection. You can see and probably even feel how this movement of my palm transmits energy across thousands of miles. And this is something that we're learning how to do in everyday activities. For example, when we're talking about waiting for the dog to come, we're not really waiting, we are actually enjoying the present moment. So again, we're not just anticipating whatever is going to happen in a few seconds from now. We're actually shifting our attention into the very present moment and what is happening right here, right now, within my being and surrounding. So we're not just constantly waiting for something to happen in the future. We're actually learning how to develop a quality of attention that allows us to be fully present. Doesn't mean that we don't think about the future. So in other words, thinking about the future is something that a lot of meditation teachers discourage the students to do. For example, one of my favorite modern mystics, Eckhart Tolle, also talks about how you should be firmly present and dedicate your attention to the present moment only. And I actually disagree to some extent with that, because on one hand, of course, it's great to be fully present. On the other hand, it's the nature of human consciousness. We have tendency to dream. And this is a major distinction between his teachings and mine, is that I actually emphasize the value of dreaming and teach how to become present in the process of a dreaming as it is unfolding. Because even if you're thinking about what is going to happen in a few seconds or a few days or a few years from now, you can be present in the dream. In other words, being lucid in this daydream, just like you can be lucid in the dream at night, if you awaken to the reality that you're dreaming right now in the present moment. So it doesn't mean that the dream should stop, whether it's a daydream about the future or a night dream. You can continue dreaming, but you are fully present in the dream while the dream is unfolding, and that allows you to actually practice the energy arts in the most pure form. Because everything is made of energy in dreams. And that allows you to really learn how to pay attention to energy, shifting the attention from the appearances of whatever dream images or dream characters may look like, to actually the inner essence, which is the pure energy of consciousness.
Right. Energy, yes, it's an interesting concept, isn't it, energy? Because I used to film a lot of dance, contemporary dance, and I noticed and I heard people talking about this, how some dancers look so good, another dancer would go through the same motions and not look so good. And one of the ideas was that it's how a dancer extends, I'll use this hand that you can see them, extends their idea of their energy in space. That even if they're not moving, the energy's moving if they have the sense of extension. If they don't, if their dance ends at their fingertips and goes no further, it doesn't have the same dynamic at all. And this is purely in dance, but of course energy, the concept of energy goes much further than that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, and dance is a fantastic opportunity to observe the culture of movement. As you can compare the dancers in Europe, for example, with the dancers in Africa, or dancers in Australia, or dancers in South America, or anywhere else in the world, everybody has certain distinct culture of movement. And so I don't believe that one culture of movement is right and the other ones are wrong. or that we should focus on creating some kind of a distinct culture movement that would be the correct one. What I believe is that entering more harmonious states of consciousness allows us to move in a more harmonious fashion. Now, what is the distinction between harmonious versus disharmonious? Obviously, it's not black and white. I don't believe in black and white polarized perception of things. So we have to simply compare what feels more and what feels less harmonious. For example, right now I'm making movements that are circular, non-stop, non-linear movements. They don't have the point of stopping and starting again. This is an example of harmonious culture of movement. If I'm making movements that start and stop, this is a lot less harmonious. It actually takes a lot more energy to create this linear start-stop motion, because it takes energy to initiate the movement, since we have to overcome the inertia of the body. Then we gain momentum, and we have to stop this momentum, which takes just exact same amount of energy. Then we initiate the movement back, which takes the exact same amount of energy again, and then we stop once again. So we actually spent 4 times as much energy as we thought we would. Now, this is an example of how we waste energy and time and life. How can we stop doing something that is so wasteful, or in other words, how can we improve upon it so that we would be able to develop a more harmonious and perhaps more energetically efficient way of moving? So instead of moving from just point A to point B, we learn how to develop the motion that is enjoyable while the movement is happening. We are no longer just trying to perform a move because we don't want to be where we are, and we want to be somewhere where we think things are going to be better. You know, the grass is always greener on the other side, as they say. So a lot of people perform the movements not because they want to experience the movement and its beauty, but because they don't want to be here, they don't accept it fully wherever they are, and they have a dream, a certain expectation perhaps, that things will be better if they just make the move over there. And it can be, for example, in martial arts context, just trying to punch, thinking, if I just land my fist into the face of this person, things are going to be better for me. Or if I just do this block, I will be safe. Or whatever, kick, or any kind of movement. And what we do is we learn how to transform this type of thinking and develop a thinking process that allows us to enjoy the journey. So it's not that we are trying to land a fist into somebody's face. We are moving because the energy is flowing this way. Now, we can also understand that perhaps it's flowing because the person's energy center in the head or somewhere else is so hyperactive that it actually becomes energetically deficient, creating a sort of an energy vacuum. And that's why the energy is flowing there. We don't even have to look. We can perform this movement with the eyes closed. The hand will find its way to that person's energy center as if we're holding onto a little air balloon. And the vacuum in that person's body will just suck that air balloon, and the hand is simply following. And it will deliver the energy projection into that part of the body because that's where the energy is needed. So in a sense, it's a very therapeutic approach if we do it mindfully. And it can also be extremely effective in terms of martial arts, because then you are literally delivering strikes into the areas of greatest deficiency or greatest weakness, which means that you don't have to expend and exert yourself so much. It takes it takes the least amount of effort and gives the greatest results. Well, that's the definition of peak performance. That's what I teach. I train martial artists to perform at peak. regardless whether it's Tai Chi, karate, mixed martial arts, or anything. And I also do the same when it applies to any types of sports or any types of healing practices. Because the principles are the same. If you're trying to accomplish something, how can you achieve that with the least amount of effort and energy expenditure and get the greatest results?
I'd like to talk to you some more about the healing, but before that, I've got a little story which leads to a question that I'd like to ask you. It's a short story. People who know me will have heard it probably many times, but when I was in Beijing, I saw in the park elderly people walking around the lake backwards. And there was one old gentleman there who had some English. I didn't have any Mandarin, so I couldn't really converse with most people. And I asked him, what are the old people doing walking around the lake backwards? And he said, they're walking backwards to their youth. I scratched my head. I really didn't know what to make of that, but that was it for the time being. And then a couple of years later, I was making a film with a Chinese Qigong master in England, and we had a meal, and I told this story, and I asked him what he made of it. And he said, well, when you're walking forwards, you can be running a shopping list, worrying about next week, having an argument with a friend, thinking about something happened before. But when you're walking backwards, you have to be present in your body. And he said every second that you spend present in your body is a healing moment. Now I wondered if you had anything to add to that.
I think it is a very enlightened and very effective approach. And I have a very similar methodology, except the way that I teach walking meditation can be done in any direction. Can be forward, backwards, sideways, wherever you want to go. And there are certain meditative techniques that basically invite your attention to focus on small details of how your feet land on the ground, how you are observing the gravity pulling you in a certain direction, because we understand that each step is the process of falling down. It's just you don't fall all the way down on your face or on your back. You place the foot before you go too far. Now, if we understand that this is how walking works, we can actually learn how to use gravity in the most efficient way. Because what happens when people walk? By and large, the center of mass bounces up and down, up and down. And the way I teach how to move is almost like you're ice skating. In the sense that your center of mass doesn't have to bounce. When you're moving with the type of gracefulness and precision that is associated with walking meditation or walking Qigong, you actually develop a very alternative way to move around across the plane. And then we also learn how to move on terrain that is not flat, because most people living in modern society get used to walking on flat surfaces. You know, we live in houses with flat floors. If you go into any kind of civilized mall or other place like that, most of the surfaces are going to be flat. Even if there is an incline, it actually most likely going to have certain steps, which each and every one of them is horizontal. So in other words, we are learning how to reprogram ourselves from using just horizontal flat surfaces to going back to nature, where there is hardly anything flat, except maybe the surface of a frozen lake. But even then, what we learn is how to develop the culture of movement that allows you, for example, if you are walking on ice, how are you going to step so that you don't slip and slide and fall? Well, you will actually have to land on the entire sole of the foot.
Like a penguin.
I have to honestly say I've never studied penguins, but they practice it every day of their life, so probably they know better than us how to do it. But yeah, you can imagine, for example, a penguin or a human being, when you step with a foot flat on the surface, it actually distributes the pressure evenly throughout the entire surface of the sole of the foot, which means the amount of pressure per square millimeter is going to be minimal. The reason why people slide when they step on ice is because they distribute pressure on a small portion of the sole of the shoes, which actually creates such a high pressure in that particular small surface of contact that it actually starts melting water. So water creates the hydroplaning effect, and that's exactly why we slip and slide. That's why, for example, ice skates are such narrow blades of metal. That narrow blade creates high pressure, so essentially the ice is melting under the blade and creates the minimal friction because the water is nice fluid. Now, what happens when we land with what I call a soulful step? We don't slip and slide. We are actually safe on the ice, and then if we want to move on terrain that is not flat or horizontal, well, we have to learn how to actually use our foot in such a way that it would be most efficient on incline or decline. And that requires so much attention, if you really are trying to learn that you cannot be anywhere else other than here present in your physical body.
And yet you still have a direction. You're going somewhere.
You are basically traveling maybe so slowly, whether forward or backwards, that you're not trying to get somewhere. You are simply enjoying the process. It's just like, I love hiking. Well, hiking is not, by and large, is not the exercise in trying to cover a certain given number of miles in a hike, or travel from point A to point B and reach certain destination. It's generally speaking a loop that you will be making, or you go somewhere and then you just turn around and come back. Often not getting anywhere other than enjoying the process of the hike. And if you combine hiking experience with walking meditation, this is what I call a walk shop. It's the type of event where we go for a walk and we are constantly paying attention to how it's working. It doesn't mean that we cannot pay attention to anything else. We can pay attention to the trees and mountains and streams and birds and animals and people around us, but our quality of attention is going to be fully present, and at the same time we can, if we learn how to do that, notice not only that, oh, there is a person or there is a bird. We don't just connect with the label, because it's just saying this is a bird. It's like putting a little label on the entity, the creature. We actually relate to the being behind the label. We also learn how to relate to people behind the labels that we habitually post on them. If you run across the individual, well, most likely the first thing you're going to do is put the label man or woman. Then, young or old. And then perhaps, nice or not so nice, or whatever. And what we're doing is we're learning how to really let go of this labeling, because it takes our attention from the inner essence of that person and distracts it so that we just pay attention to the outer superfluous form and shape, or just the words that we concoct in our mind. This is a nice person, or this is a person who is rude, or a person who is funny, or whatever.
Reminds me of Alfred Korzybski, and the map is not the territory.
Indeed. It's a major principle, I think, to remember that the map is not the territory. And at the same time, the maps is what we communicate with, or the words and labels that we put on things, on ideas, on beings around us, on ourselves even, is how we communicate. And
Well,
so
this
we
is
have
an
to figure
interesting
out
point.
how to make our communication authentic and integral enough so that it would be able to encompass both the awareness of the superfluous forms as well as awareness of the inner essence, or the true nature.
Yeah. So this is an interesting point for me that I've seen over the years when a teacher is conveying their understanding of a particular principle, that they will put it across as what I would call it usually is a kind of a mental configuration. It's a configuration that gets you to do something with your body, and that more often than not, whether the teacher is guilty of this or whether it's purely the student, it turns into a dogma. I must have my weight on my left foot if I want to do something with my right hand. And things like this which become rules, which are limitation, whereas the idea originally was to be free. And if you understand that a principle is something that can be communicated as a mental configuration, you don't have to be limited by a rule.
Absolutely. And this is exactly why I created Qigong coaching, is because I recognize the deficiency of this type of teaching. This type of teaching is based on an assumption that the teacher or the master knows better than the student something about how to use one's body, or how to use one's energy, or how to be in this world. And so the teacher's objective then is to transmit this knowledge, downloading it into the student's brain. And then if the student replicates the teacher's performance or just rattles back the formula, then that's supposed to be a good student. And the closer to the teacher's performance the student gets, then the better the student is. Well, that doesn't really support authenticity. It doesn't support the recognition or awareness of the simple fact that what's good for one person may not be so good for others. And it, most importantly, doesn't give the student an opportunity to discover. So the way that Qigong coaching works is radically different. I engage my coaching clients and my students who study with me how to become Qigong coaches in the process of discovery. For example, let's just say putting the right foot down or forward as you're doing something with your left hand. Well, there are a variety of different options. For example, if you're making the forward push, then, well, the simple option is to either push with the hand that's on the same side of the body as the front foot. So left hand forward and left foot forward. Or push with the left hand but the right foot is forward. Or you can just stand more or less flat in a neutral stance and try to push like that. How do we know which one is most efficient? Well, what's the result? The result we want to achieve in this particular case is an energy projection, which can be relatively easily measured, either by being able to push something or someone, or by, for example, applying pressure and gauging it. I mean, literally, you can use a scale, putting it on a wall and just pressing on the scale to find out how much pressure you get out of it. Or use a dynamometer, for example, that you can measure the impact with. And simply test. So when my students ask me, so how do you do it? I say, well, you have seen how I do it, but it doesn't mean that you should be doing it exact same way. Let's find out which way works best for you. So this basically removes the idea that I know what's good and what's bad. And I outright announce that I don't believe in good and bad. I'm out of kindergarten. I don't separate things around me into black and white or good and bad. Besides that, it would also entail a certain social agreement, because if we say this is good and put a label, this is a good way to do it, that's supposed to work for everyone. And we know that things don't work equally well for everyone. That means there is no social agreement. So we would be fooling ourselves if we just put the label good on something. So instead of fooling myself and my students, I'm saying, let's test. Let's reinvent the wheel, if you will. You will never forget how it works once you reinvented it. If I just tell you how the wheel works, you'll be like, yeah, that's pretty easy. But then what's the likelihood of you being able to embody this knowledge and apply it practically? So what we do is we learn how to literally test. And as we test, we compare the results, and we literally develop certain level of recognition, which is very easy to find out what works and what doesn't work. If you push with your left hand and your right foot is forward, it's going to give you a tremendously different result as compared to the forward push with your left foot forward. Now, why there are so many martial art forms, for example, that really instruct or teach to punch or push with the front hand, or the hand that's on the same side of the body as the front foot, is a mystery to me. Maybe this didn't apply to some of the teachers or some of the masters of the past. Maybe they somehow did it differently and it worked for them. But why it worked for them perhaps wasn't understood by their students. And so generations later, we see people just performing something that is literally dysfunctional and yet considered the part of the norm or the standard operating procedure. That's because people nowadays don't test that which belongs to a certain protocol or certain form or certain paradigm of thinking, if you will. And so that's exactly where coaching methodology comes handy. We literally don't take anything for granted. We test everything, and we develop our authentic recognition of what works for us, and it also may be subject to change.
That sounds very good. When I first read about your coaching program, I was slightly baffled because I couldn't understand how what I was assuming, and I did have an assumption at the time, what you would be teaching, how that could be taught online in the way that I imagined that you were doing it. Later, when I read more, I realized that I had made a false assumption about what you were doing online, because some of it was obviously done one-to-one. Now, I know in my own experience over the years that there are certain things that I could only get from my teachers through direct physical contact, that the transmission required contact. And sometimes it only took one touch to sweep away years of false ideas, because once someone really good put their hand on you, you think, oh, right. And then that just swept aside a whole lot of nonsense, because you realize this is a higher level, it's entirely different, and it was only in the touch. There was no other way to experience it or to learn it. So I understand that your program includes a lot of online stuff and some personal, in-person transmission or whatever. Is that right?
Exactly. Well, the program is based on a number of materials that you receive and go through, that include reading materials such as books, workbooks, the meditation CDs, as well as videos that essentially invite you to explore, invite you to experiment. For example, when we're talking about certain principles, and I say, well, there is a principle, for example, of orientation. The principle of orientation has to do with empowering the hand or any tool that you use by orienting the power line of your body, which is also referred to as center line, so that it would be in alignment with the hand or the tool that you're using. But I don't want to say that it will work exact same way for everyone, even though I haven't seen deviations from it, but I don't want to assume that it's going to be 100% the same for everyone. And it is best understood through testing. So what we do is we say, Usually I invite all my students to have a practice partner, which actually allows for a little bit more variation in testing. At the same time, it also makes the testing more trustworthy because there is more objectivity in it. The practice partner will try to keep you true to your results of the test, and you can do the same for your practice partner, which also creates inadvertently the the coaching relationship between the two of you. And what we do is essentially we just test. Well, how about we push with a hand directly on the center line? How about we shift it slightly off? Like, for example, in most Tai Chi schools, teachers literally instruct their students to push with a hand that would be off center line. Sometimes they say the tip of the thumb should be on the center line. Sometimes they don't relate to it whatsoever. And so sometimes they say in front of the shoulder joint. I mean, there are all kinds of interesting theories. And the results are going to be radically different. So what we do is we literally compare. How does this feel? How does this feel? How does this feel? Let's switch roles and experiment with the same, but now you push me. Now, obviously you're not pushing me across the internet. If you have a practice partner, then the two of you can push each other. Then I can coach both of the people who are working with each other and observe how it's going, giving them some feedback. So in other words, this is actually a really interesting and extremely effective way to work with people. They are experiencing touch. They are experiencing the hands-on application right on the spot. And at the same time, it also must include something more substantial from me. That is the workshop that is always the part of the curriculum. So people actually literally fly from all over the world to Portland, Oregon to attend the workshop that is completing the program. And each of the programs, which is 3-month-long course, has its own workshop. So people come here after the basic program, after the intermediate program, after the advanced program, and then they also engage in the apprenticeship, which is a year-long program that also has its own workshops, and it is even more in-depth than it actually is when I teach how to coach. And also teach other skills that very, very few Qigong teachers actually offer, such as personal development through dream yoga. Or even something that most Qigong practitioners would hope to learn, but never learn in any Qigong schools as far as I know, and that is business development. How do you actually develop your practice? Or how do you establish yourself as a trusted expert in this field in your community? Or how do you create a tribe of your students? Or how do you even figure out who would be ideal clients to work with? So, and that is something that I think separates what I teach from all other schools of the same ilk, because I don't know any other Qigong school that actually offers business development module within it. And then of course we also have more advanced levels of training, literally taking the person to a decent level of mastery, where we are going through a lot more in-depth understanding of our practices, also how to coach other people on a higher level. And of course, you know, the more you coach, the more you learn. As they say, you want to learn something, teach it. Well, I just say you want to learn something, coach it.
Very good. I wanted to ask you, just changing the subject slightly.
Sure.
Over the years of your own practice and your teaching activities, what would you say what have been your greatest challenges?
Well, the greatest challenge, I think number one challenge that I personally experienced was self-discipline. To really keep myself going when there are so many distracting things or so many necessities that need to be addressed, or just not feeling like practicing sometimes. Luckily enough, as I mentioned in the beginning of our interview, my approach to practice is that it's broken down into small incremental pieces. It's much easier to keep yourself motivated to do something small, and then you just do this more often, instead of dedicating an hour or two a day to the practice non-stop, in one sitting, so to speak. And I would say that the other major challenge that I personally experienced, and most people I know of in this field experience too, is just a sense that there is so much to learn, and life is so short. So there is a sense of, this is just overwhelming. There is always question whether or not you're learning the right thing, and whether or not what it is that you're learning it was really the thing that you will be able to benefit from. So I think that's where the testing really comes handy, or even the principle of energy resonance in general. Instead of doing something that I was told to do or I thought was the good thing to do, I learned to test energetically. What is it that I resonate with? And then I do that which I resonate with, which by default means the flow of energy is going there, which makes it a lot easier to travel down this path. I don't spend a lot of energy and effort struggling against the flow. I'm actually utilizing the power of the flow to propel me down this road. Anything and anyone that stands against me on this path will not have to deal with just my personal power. They'll have to deal with the power of the whole universe flowing in this direction. And that literally makes the journey a lot more enjoyable and a lot more effective, because you are literally moving step after step in a direction that you didn't just choose. You experience the pull in that direction. The energy wants to flow there, you just need to pay attention to it. And that creates a total different level of assuredness, a different level of confidence than anything else that I can think of.
Can I ask you, how would you say that your aim, whatever aim you've had, how has your aim changed over the years, decades of your practice? Has your aim changed, or has it always been the same?
I would say the main objective of my practice is to be in the flow. So in other words, it's not the destination that is somewhere removed into the future. You can experience being in the flow now, and tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. Then the question is, to which degree? Similar to the objective of mastery, for example, we were talking about. It's just simply looking at the feedback, recognizing whether or not you're getting as much benefit from whatever you're trying to do as you could compared with other options. So for example, if you can do something that gives you this result, but you want that result, well, keep doing something that gives you this result would be a sign of insanity. So we're learning how to literally develop the attitude that if you want that result, then you actually have to do something different from whatever you do that brings forth this result. So now we have to actually figure out what that might be. And the most intelligent way, to make choices is based on a recognition of energy resonance, as far as I'm concerned. And that means that each and every step that I take on Earth becomes an opportunity to learn how to make the choices based on energy resonance, based on the perception of the flow of Qi. Well, obviously you have to be in the Qigong state in order to perceive Qi, because that's the definition of Qigong state. It's the state of consciousness that allows you to perceive the flow of Qi. That is the practice of Qigong in and of itself. Doing forms, waving arms, doing some breathing exercises or whatever is not going to be a Qigong practice by default if you're not in Qigong state. It's going to be an exercise program, some form of calisthenics. I don't want to say that it's a bad idea. Obviously, living a sedentary lifestyle that most people live, they would benefit from any type of exercise. But if they want greater results, well, then there are some particular ways of engaging in the process of exploration that will actually lead to experience something that they really were dreaming of. This is literally the way to manifest and live your dreams. If you have certain thing that is happening right now, but you're not fully satisfied with it, or you're even suffering, and you have a dream, or you wish that things would be different, and there is a juxtaposition between the dream state and the current state of affairs, the gap between them is the cause of discontent. Now, what I do is I actually teach how to integrate the current state and the dream state in such a way that they are one inseparable state of consciousness, which actually means that you are literally beginning to live your dream. Now, what do you do when you realize that you're living a dream? Well, that's the practice of dream yoga. You actually learn how to live your dreams lucidly. It can be done in your daydreams, like we were talking about. It can be done in night dreams, which is what most people think of when they think of lucid dreaming. But the most interesting thing is to learn how to translate this lucidity into your daily life, so that you can be as awake in this dream that we call our daily life as you can be in your night dream. And then what do you do when you are lucid in your dream? Well, that's what I call the practice of dream being. It's not really a matter of doing as much as it's a matter of being. How are you going to be in a dream? Well, my simple answer is be in the flow. In the flow of the dreaming. The energy that everything is made of in the dream. If you're paying attention to that energy and you notice that it's flowing somewhere, which of course it will be flowing, change is the most constant thing in the universe, you just simply observe where it's flowing and then learn to navigate that flow so that you would be in the flow of the dream. If you're not in the flow of the dream, then by default you're basically creating your own nightmare. Nobody's doing it to you, you're doing it to yourself. Well, this is a very empowering thing to recognize, because it really gives you the opportunity to take total responsibility for everything that you experience in your dream or in this big dream that we call daily life. And also it gives you the power to make choices that would allow you to actually experience that being in the flow of the dream and enjoying the ride. And that's basically what people often refer to as enlightenment. They say, well, if you're enlightened, you experience bliss or nirvana. In Buddhist terminology, that means a state of freedom from suffering. Well, that's exactly what I teach. Literally how to recognize that suffering is optional. It's something that we create in our own lives, and we learn how to choose when to suffer and when not to suffer. I don't want to say that suffering is bad and needs to be eliminated and got rid of forever. Because sometimes suffering is actually very educational or even instrumental in our personal development. As a matter of fact, I've never heard of anyone who would attain enlightenment without having gone through any suffering. Have you?
No, nobody.
So we learn how to recognize that suffering is optional, and we don't have to suffer when we realize that we have created this ourselves. But until then, suffering is necessary, because that is what keeps us motivated. As they say, pain is a great motivator. So what we do is we recognize that there is a little bit of discontent somewhere. We're still not quite fully in alignment with this dream. And that allows us to, or encourages us to continue paying attention. So we're not just drifting mindlessly. It's a very mindful practice. And at the same time, we are not stuck in one particular current, because we can even navigate these currents. Because as you can imagine, currents flow in different directions. If we want to be somewhere and we see that the current that we are in isn't taking us there, well, it's not taking us there at this level of consciousness. That doesn't mean that there is no current going there. It's just like hot air ballooning. Have you ever gone hot air ballooning?
I haven't. It's something I'd like to try one of these days.
Well, experienced pilots of hot air balloons can actually take off, fly north, and then go east, and then go south, and then go west, and land pretty much right where they launched.
I'm knowing where the air currents are, where the currents are.
Exactly. The currents at different altitudes flow in different directions, quite often in opposing directions. So what we do is we learn how to change our plane of consciousness to match the direction where we want to go with the current that goes there.
This links with something which interests me. I've been following with some interest the Institute of Heart Math and some of the things that they've been talking about with regard to the solar wind and coronal mass ejections as we're going toward the peak of this solar cycle 24 and so on, and they're saying that a lot of people get very upset or very disturbed when these coronal mass ejections arrive and hit our Earth's magnetosphere. And I've often said that I think that if it can be the wind in your sails if you are ready for it. Do you believe that this what's coming from the sun currently is part of what we read in the books about the heavenly Qi, something that we deal with from the heavens?
Absolutely. Everything is Qi. Everything is energy. Even the material objects that we think we're surrounded with are all made of energy. There is nothing in this universe, as far as I'm concerned, that's not made of energy. So if we recognize that everything, including even the densest matter, is another manifestation of energy, which is what anybody would agree with if they graduated from high school nowadays, then this is just a matter of learning how to feel the flow of Qi. If there is some type of energetic flow or energetic projections that are being projected at you at the same time, you don't have to always just be pushed over by them. You can also navigate and perhaps reorient yourself in such a way that you don't get pushed over. For example, if somebody is pushing you, you don't always have to get pushed over and fall over on your back. You can also navigate this energy projection. Somebody is projecting energy at you, and any push or any movement is another manifestation of an energetic projection. If we pay attention to the energetic essence of that movement, rather than just perceive it as, oh, how dare he push me or punch me. So instead of taking it personally on a superficial level, we actually pay attention to the energy that is the true nature of this experience. Then we can deal with this energy in an enlightened way. What's the enlightened way to deal with it? Well, instead of reacting to it, which by definition means acting against the oncoming force, you can respond to it. How do we respond to any type of energy projections? Be that the human energy projection in the form of a punch, or the heavenly Qi punching you with extra energy coming from the sun. Well, essentially you make yourself less available to be affected if you don't want to be affected, or perhaps even learn how to utilize this energy if there is something that you would like to put it to work to accomplish something. So, for example, if somebody's punching you, as a Tai Chi practitioner, you may recognize, oh, their punch is no problem. And so you just receive this punch and then perhaps use it to take the person further than he anticipated to go. He can't stop himself because he's making the movement. He would have to struggle against his own movement. So as you're just helping him move, he will go farther than he anticipated to go, which will lead to losing balance. Okay, fine. So then you just simply help him land on the ground in a way that would keep him from continuing assault. Or if it is a non-martial art experience, if it is something that is simply wind. But you don't always have to just stand against the wind and fight against it. You simply feel, all right, there is a wind. How can I put this wind to work? And simple example of that is what you just said, using it for sailing. So how can this wind actually propel me somewhere where I would like to go? And how can I enjoy this journey using this power instead of my personal power pedaling my boat, for example?
Yeah, it brings to mind a realization I remember some years ago about qualities and the operation of distinction, of distinguishing. So one of my early teachers, Tai Chi teachers, encouraged us to develop a quality of softness. And then later I met a much higher level practitioner who felt very soft when you put your hand on him. But he said, distinguish full and empty. And then actually I was reading Carl Jung's funny little book which he wrote, The 7 Sermons to the Dead, where he talks about the operation of distinction, of to distinguish qualities, that if you pursue a quality, you actually grab hold of its opposite, unwittingly, at the same time. But when you distinguish qualities, you don't do that. Can you comment on that?
Well, if I understand you correctly, qualities, for example, like hardness and softness, can be understood also from a Chinese philosophy point of view as yin and yang. And so, if you are trying to soften yourself all the time, well, it's a relative pursuit, because you're going to try to be softer than something else. And that something else will always have to be harder than the soft aspect of this juxtaposition. So, in other words, like you said, there is always going to be the opposition of terms. Then there is also a very interesting dialectical transmutation, or even alchemical transmutation that happens sometimes. For example, if you try to be really hard, let's say you tense up and you hold tension for a while, the longer you hold tension, the more you'll get tired. And eventually, the tired muscles relax. And they will relax to a deeper level of relaxation than they were before the beginning of this tension period. So that's one of the ways that I actually work with my clients. If they come to me with pains, and 90% of pains in the body are a result of musculoskeletal tension, I sometimes encourage them to tense up. They say, wait a moment, but I came to you to relax. I didn't want to tense up. I say, guess what? It's a chemical transmutation that you're going to experience. Let's experiment. Let's find out if it works. Maybe you are an unusual person for whom it's not going to work. I would love to find that out. And so again, instead of just fixing them according to my assumptions of what is right for them, I actually engage them in a process of exploration. They are personally involved then in their own self-healing, which makes my work a lot easier. They take responsibility for what they experience, And also they learn how they can do this outside of my clinic. So in other words, they don't have to be reliant or dependent on me so much. It may not be a great business model, but it certainly is a very empowering process that virtually everyone appreciates. Rather than me just fixing them or doing something or giving them a pill, I actually teach them how they can heal themselves. On the other hand, there are many other approaches that, of course, we can take if tension is the issue. But coming back to your original question, I would say that discernment is a real pathway to mastery. So if you can gauge, for example, that something is fuller or something is more empty, it's not just black and white. Something is relatively more empty than something else. How do you know it's emptier? Well, you compare. How does it feel to encounter something that's empty? How does it feel to encounter something that's full? How do you apply it to a variety of different situations rather than just creating a cookie cutter type of approach? So then you develop a very intelligent and at the same time a very effective way to create discernment that works virtually automatically. You just simply pay attention to the feedback that you get from your little test, and it immediately tells you what's what. It's so radically different, though, from the way that most people learn Qigong or Tai Chi or other similar disciplines, because most people say, for example, Sung, relax. So often Chinese teachers or other sifus instruct and direct the students to relax more and more and more. Well, there's only so much relaxation one can experience before they fall down on the ground in a puddle of jello. So we learn how to really develop a distinction or sort of discernment between what is effective, what is not effective, how much of this is appropriate for this particular situation, and how long does it need to be this way. So in other words, there's going to be some change that's going to happen, and we recognize that change is going to happen. There's nothing that is going to stay unchanged. How can we be in the flow of that change when it occurs? That's another way to put it. How do we learn how to be in the flow? We go with the flow of changes. Recognizing that changes are happening, we stop struggling against the changes, accept them, that change may be actually a wonderful thing. And so we develop a taste for the change rather than for the habit of being unchanged.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions which have come up in my group. I have a private, closed Facebook group, which is by invitation only, and it's a very nice group because people feel very free to openly discuss all sorts of things without being troubled by argumentative trolls and whatever, the people that turn up on Facebook. So I have a couple of questions, one of which I think I'm just interested to have your input, and I will certainly share your input with the people online. One of them had to do with the microcosmic orbit. We see many things online about the microcosmic orbit, and one gets encouraged to contract the perineum, to close certain points and so on. And people want to know, will I be leaking energy if I don't keep this up all the time? In other words, should I have this fixed point in my energy system? Should I maintain this? Well, I know how I would answer that, or I have answered it, but I'm interested to know how you would answer such a question.
I would love to compare notes, so to speak, or to compare my answer with yours. To put it simply, the point in perineum, also referred to as huyin, is not just a point. It's actually an energy aspect that is related to a major muscle group called the pelvic floor or pelvic diaphragm. So in a sense, it's somewhat similar to the thoracic diaphragm that we use for breathing. Most people who teach deep abdominal breath, which is part of pranayama, is part of most Qigong styles, breathing, except the reverse breathing. And I really have a pretty harsh opinion about reverse breathing, by the way. They teach about the use of diaphragm. Some explain that the diaphragm is actually a muscle, and so it can contract and relax. Some even go as far as to explain the dynamics of how the diaphragm works with muscles antagonists that squeeze the abdominal cavity, such as rectus abdominis muscles, the transverse abdominis, as well as the obliques. And if the diaphragm contracts, it becomes flatter, which pushes the internal organs down, and then the majority of teachers suggest to simply distend the stomach, relaxing the muscles of the abdomen as the person inhales. And then to exhale, they contract the abdominal muscles, relax the diaphragm at the same time. So the diaphragm lifts up, squeezing the air out of the lungs. That's the simple explanation of the mechanics of breathing. So in a sense, it works like a bellows or a pump. And what we do is we also learn, or what I do is I also learn and practice how to engage the pelvic diaphragm in breath, which is extremely important, interesting, and healthful, because this is one of those muscles that most people don't even know that they have. So how much attention do they pay to it? The organs that are in the pelvic bowl often are underappreciated or don't receive much attention. And as we know, where attention goes, energy flows. As they say, Yi Dao, Qi Dao. So if we don't pay attention to it, often it leads to energetic deficiency. And the organs of the pelvic floor, which includes anything from reproductive organs to bladder to, say, prostate in men, or a variety of issues that happen with women, prolapse and other things that are the result of laxity of the diaphragmatic muscles of the pelvic floor, as well as simply inability to engage these muscles when necessary. Let's say if we want to enjoy sex, often we can't enjoy it very much if our muscles don't work. Men sometimes have issues with erection. Again, that would happen only as a result of laxity or inability of these muscles to contract. Women often experience, suffer from challenges with reproductive systems, and just simple things like incontinence. So we'll learn is how to engage these muscles of the pelvic floor and exercising when we're doing not just the diaphragmatic breath. It's the dual diaphragmatic breath. It's the thoracic diaphragm that contracts, pushes the internal organs down, and then the stomach doesn't just distend. The pelvic floor muscles also relax, allowing the organs to drop further down, and then contract, lifting the internal organs, pushing them upwards as the thoracic diaphragm relaxes and expel the air out of the lungs. So that basically moves the internal organs up and down in addition to in and out. Almost like a cylinder in a car engine. And that actually massages the internal organs, trains the muscles of the pelvic diaphragm. If you combine this with the macrocosmic orbit, or microcosmic orbit if you will, depending on what is it that you're trying to do, you can actually synchronize breathing with revolutions of your attention. Again, where attention goes, the energy flows. So basically, this makes the entire experience more natural, and at the same time engaging you in developing yourself in a way that most people never develop. If you want to experience what most people experience, then do what they do. If you want to experience something more extraordinary, then do something else. Something more extraordinary.
So tell me about your feelings about the reverse breathing technique.
Well, I think that it's a rather misguided technique. And of course, a lot of martial arts enthusiasts and Qigong practitioners would say, oh, this is a really harsh judgment. Well, it's, I think, based on my understanding of anatomy and physiology as well as energetics of the human body. And I have never seen anyone actually sufficiently benefit from it. I've asked many guests of my show to explain, so how exactly do you inhale? If you are doing the reverse breathing, you are sucking the stomach in at the inhalation. Where does the air go? Or if your stomach goes in, your internal organs go up, push the diaphragm upwards. How are you going to inhale at that moment?
This links with an interesting experience I had some years ago where I was on a sledge. I mean, many years ago. This was 1980s. I was on a toboggan going down the hill and I went over a bump. And I landed on my coccyx on the edge of the sledge. So I bruised my tailbone very, very badly. And for 2 or 3 weeks it was painful. And I caught a cold, just to add to it. And what I discovered was that every time I sneezed, there was this major contraction, muscular contraction happening right down here. Mm-hmm. And I thought, surely I can switch these muscles off. But of course you can't. You cannot disengage your sneezing from your tail. And I think most people go through life without ever knowing that. I was lucky enough to have an injury that taught me that. And then I started to be interested in the action of the sneeze. And this was around the time I was being introduced to the concept of Fajin, Fali, release of energy in power in martial arts. And I noticed that when you perform Fajin, your action in your abdomen is quite different from when you breathe naturally. So it seems to me that these things are articulations of things that occur naturally rather than things that one sort of artificially creates, and that the case is to investigate them rather than to try to produce them.
Well, what happens naturally, by and large, is healthier than whatever we do artificially in a contrived manner. Now, or the way I put it often is in the form of a question, or rather a rhetorical question. What can be healthier than being natural? Now, when we experience Fajing, which is the energy projection, obviously we are using our breath, or we want to use our breath in order to make it more effective. I've never seen anyone who would, for example, experience any success in Fajing inhaling at the same time. So
I've never seen anyone sneeze while inhaling at the same time either.
My point exactly. So what happens is that when Fajing is happening, there is a rapid increase of pressure in the lungs. You actually are compressing the highly sensitive nerve endings that are embedded into the diaphragm. That sends this signal to the central nervous system that brings it to the higher level of activity, or activates the central nervous system, that actually engages the muscles in a slightly different manner, because it allows you to contract and relax very quickly. So the rapid succession of contraction and relaxation creates a wave-like motion. If without the wave, you can't really project energy. Now, this wave is not as slow as what I'm just demonstrating, but the body mechanics are very similar. It's just a rapid increase the tension and then rapid relaxation. Increase of the tension here, rapid relaxation here. Increase of the tension here, rapid relaxation. So there is the chain reaction that goes into the Fa Jing, or into the projection of energy. And then if we recognize that the body is made of water pretty much, 80% or so is water. Yeah. So then how can we move like water? So I teach how to think like water, how to move like water, how to identify with being made of water. Not many people actually consciously think and identify that I'm made of water. Most people think that they're made of hard solid matter, which is just simply not true. So what we do is we actually dispel this misguided notion, replace it with a more intelligent recognition of what we are made of, and then we learn how to move like water. Well, what is the wave? Well, if you look at the body of water, what we call the wave is basically the part of the body of water rising as compared to the other parts of the same body of water. And it usually moves. So the same happens in the physical body. There is a certain rising and falling. For example, if I'm making a projection sideways, you can see how there is a wave-like dynamics in this. And the reason why it's happening is because there is a certain contraction and relaxation. And I can literally feel a little Fa Jing even though I'm moving very, very slowly. I don't even have to move that much. Literally, what Bruce Lee was famous for, the 1-inch punch, is something that can be done at zero distance. 0-inch punch, as they call it. You literally are touching the target, and then you're not withdrawing and striking, like one former Shaolin monk was demonstrating in the History Channel not so long ago. You actually are keeping the hand right there, and then just creating the wave that moves through the body and delivers the energy into the target without moving the limb back and forth. So it's a really effective and extremely scary technique, because then, for example, if you are capable of doing this, you can literally, somebody is making a punch towards you, and you are right there. You don't block, you don't move to try to evade it, just slight movement so that the punch just grazes your skin. And at the same time, your hand is already there. So that creates the situation where you literally transcend everything that most people think of in terms of martial arts. It's like, that's what I call mastery.
Very good. I've probably got a couple more questions. I don't know how we're doing for time.
Oh, we're doing great.
Okay. Okay. Here's one. Here's a left of field question about breathing. Now, I just have to say a little bit about my own history here. Up until 1980, I suffered from very severe asthma, and I tried a lot of different things to cure myself, and nothing was working until I began to study Tai Chi and Qigong, mostly Tai Chi, and at the same time I was going to biofeedback classes with a man called Maxwell Cade in London, and these were using galvanometers, skin thermometers, minute variations of skin temperature, and a thing called the mind mirror, which shows 4 different types of brainwave in 2 hemispheres of the brain and shows symmetry and so on. Nice. And so I was using the biofeedback to give me feedback on my level of physical arousal, because I realized that I needed to be a lot calmer, and at the same time I was beginning to learn about breathing with in the general abdominal region. You've said a lot about that already, but I wasn't getting a great deal of specific input about how to breathe, which I'm glad about now, because the biofeedback gave me a guideline on when I was breathing in a way that allowed me to relax the most. And through this method, it's not a method, but through a lucky combination, chance combination of two different streams of input, I cured myself of the really severe asthma within about 4 months. And I never had a serious asthma attack again. Many years later, in fact only a few years ago, I was trying to help a friend of mine who had asthma. And I started coming up with these cliches to her. And I stopped myself and realized that's not what I did. That's not what happened. So I started to do some research and I came across Dr. Buteyko. Are you familiar with Dr. Buteyko's method?
Yes, of course.
Right. So this is sort of the opposite of what most people say. People say, take a deep breath. Well, in my case, I cured my asthma through breathing not very deeply at all. And it was only when I was able to breathe freely in a relatively gentle, quiet and shallow way that I was then able to breathe more when I needed it without disturbing this more natural way of breathing. Now, I'd be interested to hear your comments on maybe on the Buteyko method. I didn't use it, but it turns out that I did something very similar to it. And also on the idea of shallow breathing as opposed to deep breathing. Not instead of, but where it fits in to the picture.
Well, we're just talking about how everything that's natural is going to be healthier than anything that's unnatural. And Dr. Buteyko, who was a well-known Ukrainian physiologist and doctor in the 70s and 80s, perhaps 90s. I don't know when he died, or whether he died.
Yeah, he died, yeah.
As far as I know, his method, and I personally experienced a little bit of it. I never studied how to be like a teacher of this method, but from what I understand, he developed it by recognizing that the central nervous system receives this signal that there isn't enough CO2 in the lungs. And so it actually is trying to get more CO2 in the lungs by simply reducing the capacity of the lungs, by shutting down the alveoli. And that is basically the mechanics of how the asthma attack works. Now, obviously, the Buteyko method could be applied not only to asthma attacks, but a variety of other health conditions.
Sleep apnea and so on.
A lot of things. What happens is that, for example, when we sleep, we don't breathe deep. By and large, it's a relatively shallow and smooth breathing that is nothing like the deep abdominal breathing that most people think is the healthiest thing to do. What also happens is that this breathing allows us to ventilate our lungs just fine for 8 hours or whatever amount of time we sleep. We're not suffering from lack of oxygen. As a matter of fact, that's when most of the healing occurs. So, maybe there is a correlation between the healing processes that are happening in that state and the way that the breathing works. Is there any way to facilitate healing more consciously by doing that which the body already does unconsciously? So in other words, I don't prescribe Buteyko method breathing or relatively shallow method of breathing as the prescription, because I just generally don't diagnose and treat diseases. However, if somebody who came to me, for example, with asthma, I would coach them to discover for themselves what works, using something similar to biofeedback, simply using your own body as a biofeedback mechanism, and developing the quality of attention that is necessary to determine how biofeedback, what kind of biofeedback the body is providing you. And if you use that approach, you will probably accomplish same or some similar results to what you accomplished in a matter of 4 months using biofeedback mechanism. It's not instant. It's not just, you just do this and you'll be okay. It's a mindfulness that is involved and developed through the process of exploration, perhaps going through some trials and errors, remembering that when you're doing the trial and error type of testing, not to push yourself over the edge of your comfort zone, so you don't suffocate, for example, or don't hurt yourself. But you do explore what it's like to be on edge so that you develop the awareness of that area of your comfort zone that most people don't want to be aware of. Most people either want to be comfortable or they want to get somewhere that's outside of the comfort zone. As a matter of fact, most of our dreams and aspirations, whether it's related to health or lifestyle or any accomplishments, reside beyond the edges of our comfort zone. Otherwise, we would be already living them. It wouldn't be what we call potential or aspiration, that we would be actually manifesting them right now. So, what is it that stops us from going there and manifesting it? Well, because it's uncomfortable to be there, or in other words, there is a certain edge of the comfort zone that stops us from going. If we push harder, we will be hurting ourselves. And by and large, we'll be contracting back from there. It's exactly what also happens to people who do stretching. And by and large, martial artists do stretching, and so do athletes and gymnasts and various other types of people involved in movement arts, be it yoga or dance. And when you stretch, you literally push yourself or pull yourself outside the comfort zone. You literally pull your muscles beyond the edge of their comfort zone. That's the definition of stretching.
So what do? Do you pandiculate?
Pandiculate? I'm not sure what that means.
You know this wonderful thing that cats and dogs do, which we say it's stretching, but it's not. Where they create, it's a little bit like what you were saying earlier, where they create a tension, and then it gives way to release. But they have these things that they look a bit like stretching, but it's a different action, usually involves a yawn as well. It's a kind of a wave of contraction which passes through the body.
Absolutely.
But it's different from stretching.
Yes, very much like cats and dogs, pandiculation as you call it. It's fantastic that you also mentioned yawning. Yawning happens when the central nervous system has received a signal that, okay, I've achieved what I was trying to achieve with my body. For example, there was some tension in the shoulders. Great, let's tense them up more. Now, I've actually accomplished what I was trying to accomplish with this muscle tension. Then the central nervous system recognizes, okay, well, mission success. I don't have to send signals of contraction to these muscles anymore. Then when the muscles don't receive the signals of contraction, what do? They start relaxing and lengthening. As they lengthen, we can go with the flow of lengthening just like we went with the flow of shortening or contraction first. And then as we go with the flow of lengthening, that facilitates the lengthening. But we don't push beyond the edge of a comfort zone, because if we lengthen beyond the edge, that turns into stretching. And the central nervous system will receive a signal of alarm from the nerves embedded in the muscle, that the muscle is about to get overstretched or even torn. And then it will start sending signals of contraction, which is what we call the stretch reflex, which is exactly what explains pretty poor results of stretching when people try to become more flexible by stretching. And instead of that, we get to the edge of the comfort zone and we move along the edge. It's a very different culture of movement. You literally, instead of going perpendicular to the edge of the comfort zone, pushing yourself over the edge or running away from it because they engage in the fight or flight essentially. You get to the edge and you start moving along the edge, exploring what it's like to be on this edge. And the more time you spend exploring the edge of the comfort zone, the more you learn about it, the more you get used to being there, thereby expanding or eroding the edge of the comfort zone. And that happens organically without hurting yourself, so you don't experience any side effects such as pain the following day. And also that enables you to expand beyond what you used to feel as your limit gradually in the direction where you wanted to go without creating this struggle or fighting against your own body. So essentially I believe that this is a lot more intelligent and natural way to explore how a body can move and experience full range of motion, just like dogs and cats do.
Great. I've got one last question on my list that I'd like to bring up, and I want to relate it back to something we spoke about earlier. I told you that I did a little bit of study with Maxwell Cade, who was using this mind mirror, and he was doing a lot of research back in the 70s. One of the things I know that he told us about was that he would get up on the mind mirror. He would work with healers, for example. So he did a lot of meditators, and he would distinguish between what the mind mirror showed in a Zazen meditator as opposed to a Hindu mantra meditator, and you get a different pattern, different proportions of alpha and theta and so on. But he was looking at these forms. You get a very symmetrical shape if someone produced equal amount of alpha in both hemispheres, and so on. So the healers would produce a certain pattern on the screen, and then their subject, their client, if their healing turned out to be a successful session, the client would produce a very similar, or perhaps the same pattern, but at a lower amplitude on the screen. And if they didn't, then it wasn't a successful healing. And this links, in my mind, with this word you use a lot, resonance. That there's a resonance between the healer and the recipient of the healing. Now, a discussion arose in my group recently about healing and why some people can heal other people and can't heal this person, they can heal that person. And a question of raising one's vibration and whether one can hope to heal more people and be a more effective healer by raising one's vibration. And I would like to ask you your thoughts on this subject.
So what's exactly the question?
Well, are there two different ways of looking at this? I mean, I suppose I'm inclined toward thinking about resonance rather than raising vibration. For me, the idea of raising the vibration, maybe one's vibration does rise as one progresses along a path, I don't know. But certainly one's ability to resonate with a wide variety of different types of people at will is something that comes from a kind of discipline. And that when one can have a resonance with someone, then there's a greater chance that one might be able to produce that, bring about that sympathetic vibration with them, which seems to be what the healing process is. I mean, it's not my energy going to someone else. It's more to do with the person's own healing process being stimulated by them having a resonant signal that encourages them, that accepts them, that says, okay, you're fine now, just go ahead and heal yourself. Okay, get better, you'll be fine. Or you are fine.
Absolutely. Well, if we recognize that consciousness has a variety of different frequencies, like we were talking about alpha rhythms and beta and delta and gamma and whatnot, if we recognize that different frequencies are associated with different states of consciousness, and also that's one of the kind of secret teachings, well, not really secret anymore, is that how different states of consciousness manifest somatically in your physical body in the form of patterns of holding tension. So if you are sad, you will hold yourself probably quite differently as compared to the time when you are excited. If you are curious, you may hold yourself very different as compared to the time when you are skeptical. And so on. Being angry, for example, is a very different holding pattern compared to being judgmental. So what we do is we learn how to recognize a variety of different frequencies of energy, of consciousness, how they manifest in the body, so that we can use the body as a similar type of feedback mechanism, although it may not be as colorful. Sometimes it's quite colorful. We've developed the kinesthetic or somatic awareness of our holding patterns, and we can also recognize and see them in others. That allows us to notice that the person is in a particular state of consciousness. In other words, we can literally read that person's mind, or at least see where they're at. Now, if a person is stuck in one frequency, and it really doesn't matter whether it's a high or low frequency, by and large, it is still stuckness. It still means that the person is only operating at a particular level of their capabilities, and other energy resources, other ways of being are not being utilized or feel like they are unavailable, which limits the person's availability to life in turn, and quality of life in general. So what we do then is, and of course tensions in the body lead to different blockages, energy blockages that precipitate issues with various internal organs or cause pain in the body. And by and large, people who go to visit doctors or healers suffer from some form of pain or another, which is actually the result of this somatic manifestation of the state of consciousness that they're stuck in. So as the coach, I nowadays work with people on discovering how else they can be, besides the habitual way of being that they're used to, that they identify with. That's what their identity is. In other words, we're learning how it's possible to be able to tune into other frequencies of energy, which will, by definition, lead to experiencing different, perhaps unusual patterns of tension in the body, which will also lead to a different picture if you look at the distribution of electromagnetic waves in the hemispheres of the brain. And if you discover the way that works particularly well for you, and I don't want to say that there's one way that works for everyone. It's like when I talk about being in the flow, it's not just one way for everyone, it's how you can be in your flow. And you cannot really experience much benefit from you being in my flow. We may experience some degree of rapport if, for example, I'm in your flow or you're in mine, but then it would be nice to be able to actually be in your flow authentically, because otherwise you don't really experience your flow, and that doesn't really provide you all the benefits of being in the flow, such as feeling authentically empowered, feeling that you are in the right place in the right time, so to speak, and also doing the right thing, which means it's not really about doing, it's about being, as we already talked about it. And what we do is we discover that it's easier for the healer to establish rapport, because that's what basically makes one a more successful healer, is that this person is capable of tuning into the other person's frequency of energy, first just to establish communication, because otherwise it's really hard to even understand what is going on with you. And then, the more rapport we develop, the more it will feel like, wow, this is really nice to be in rapport with each other. And then the healer starts shifting into the state of being in one's own flow. And the coaching client or the healing client may actually want to stay in rapport. So they will be shifting too, kind of following, consciously or unconsciously, mirroring that transition into a more state of the flow. Now, that's the difference between healing and coaching. That I don't just lead people to experience my flow, I also coach them how to discover your flow, how to discover their flow. And that is what leads them to experience life a lot more abundantly, experience abundant health, experience abundant flow of energy. So in other words, healing by definition is the activity based on the assumption that something is wrong with a person and we know how to fix it. We're going to heal them. And coaching, on the other hand, is the process that recognizes that the person is where he or she at because they are operating at a certain level of energy of consciousness. If they don't change their identity, they may experience some changes, but that's not going to stick. Because they won't feel like themselves. Even if they operate at that new frequency level that they discovered in the healing session, they won't be able to maintain it. They go home and they just slide back into their habitual state of being, with all the consequent tensions and health issues. So that's exactly why I recognize that it's important and paramount to encourage and inspire and empower each person I work with to discover how they can be in flow. And there's a certain methodology that I use for that. Obviously, it wouldn't be possible to share that fully in the context of our interview today, but it's a really effective and relatively simple, not always easy, but very simple methodology that literally allows you to experience what it's like to be in the flow somatically. So you literally embody that state. You don't just talk about being in the flow, you literally start walking the talk. And then you learn how to tap into this state more frequently, so wherever you go, you can still be an embodiment of that being in the flow. And that basically is what transforms our quality of life.
Absolutely.
Great. Did I answer your question?
Yes, very good. I feel that as it happens, there are lots of parallels. There are a great many parallels between what you're doing and the things that I have found myself to be doing over the years. And I'm not running a coaching business by any means, but I have a few students. But broadly speaking, yeah, I see the similarities in the approach that we take. Something, yeah.
Fantastic.
A lot of it. Yeah.
Well, that's what we call resonance, right?
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
the way that I put it in my book, in my first book, is that if we want to wage wars, we focus on differences. If we want to wage peace, we focus on similarities.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to interview you, and I look forward to hearing more of your broadcasts on Blog Talk Radio and reading you, and I hope we'll be speaking again soon.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. It's been a real great pleasure to talk to you, and I am positive that a lot of our listeners will benefit greatly from this dialogue. And I hope that you enjoyed it just as much as I did.
Very much so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.